City TV Vancouver is a proud supporter of Pride. Happening tonight in Vancouver.
Changing border rules for fully vaccinated Canadians means we could be using these without quarantine soon. It's a welcome relief, especially for those in Point Roberts, but not coming soon enough for some.
I'm happy that they're finally paying some attention, but they should have been listening for the last 4 months to us.
The brunt of the work is still on the marginalized folks that want to see the system changed.
Calls for more anti-racism lessons in schools, why teachers and Muslim leaders say education could prevent horrific acts of hate.
Movie theaters are planning to reopen again in British Columbia, and cinema owners are excited to see the box office lineups again after being closed for 7 months. But will audiences flock back to the big screen?
This is City News Everywhere.
The requirement to stay in a government-authorized hotel is being lifted for people who currently have the right of entry to Canada.
Ottawa taking a step towards reopening, announcing that in early July, fully vaccinated Canadians and permanent residents will no longer have to quarantine for 2 weeks or stay in federally approved hotels for up to 3 days. But other restrictions will remain in place.
Travelers would have to be fully vaccinated 14 days or more prior to their arrival. And they will still be required to have a negative pre-departure PCR test result and required to be tested upon arrival with a suitable quarantine plan to wait for their day one test result.
Since late February, Ottawa has required passengers returning from non-essential travel to quarantine for up to 3 days at a federally approved hotel while waiting for a negative COVID test. The stay costing passengers up to $2,000. But many Canadians decided to pay the $3,000 fine instead and skip the stay. The feds are not yet ready to give a firm date and are still working on details like, what about children under 12 who are not yet approved for a vaccine?
What we want to do is take things carefully and cautiously so that we can sustain this recovery for Canadians.
But the changes falling short for some.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a step in the right direction, but it's not the full step we were hoping it would be.
Canada's tourism industry has been ravaged by the pandemic, and despite the changes at the airports, Potter is anxious to see restrictions at the Canada-US land border eased.
To see that land border open again would allow for people to begin to make those summer travel plans and perhaps even start to see the return of business travel back and forth across the border.
The federal health minister says passengers returning must be vaccinated with Canadian-approved vaccines. In Ottawa, Nigel Newlove, City News.
People living in Point Roberts are hoping their months of being cut off from Canada because of the pandemic could be ending with the feds soon making allowances for fully vaccinated Canadians and permanent residents. Brian Calder is one of them, and more than anything, wants the eye surgery he's been waiting to get in Ladner, and he's not willing to wait much longer.
If they're going to keep dragging along with the carrot in front of the donkey, and I'm the donkey, never catching the carrot, I'll make a move.
The dual citizen's been pressing for leniencies since the start, hand-painting his own Point Roberts lockdown shirts. The impending border change, the first glimmer of hope for him and his Point Roberts neighbors. 85% of them already fully vaccinated. And there are some indications the border could fully reopen this summer, meaning we could all be using these a lot sooner than later.
Some want to open up tomorrow. Others don't want to open up until September. I think somewhere between those two poles is where we'll land. The quintessential Canadian compromise, I suspect.
BC's health minister says the first steps of this federal plan to ease border crossings is reasonable. But he wants to see a clear plan before we welcome the world, knowing that there will be infections as more people come and go.
We prepare for what is needed to deal with that as the time comes in advance, not announce then prepare, but prepare then announce.
Brian Calder's done waiting for more announcements and waiting for the surgery he says will retain sight of an eye that will go otherwise. But border officials have deemed not essential.
At this stage now, 15 months later, I'm going to go on the 22nd of June, and I'm going through. And I'm showing my card that said I was vaccinated in March.
At this point, Calder says preventing him going is punitive. He hopes federal rules will change fast enough to make that appointment without issue, but he's going regardless.
I don't care what the results are. They can come and get me. because I'm going in. It's a 2.5-hour operation. I'm coming back, and let's see what happens.
For City News in Victoria, I'm News 1130's Lisa Yuzda.
The province is reporting 148 new cases of COVID-19. 195 individuals are currently hospitalized, 47 of whom are in intensive care. Today, 74.5% of all adults in BC have received their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. The province says the fight against COVID-19 will not be interrupted following yesterday's arrest of the Interior's top doctor. Dr. Albert devilliers has been charged with sexual assault and sexual interference involving a child. The alleged crimes occurred between 2018 and 2020 in Grand Prairie, Alberta, where Dr. devilliers worked before moving to Kelowna last summer.
These are serious charges, of course, and they're very concerning to us and obviously for everyone in Interior Health in particular. The individual is now on leave. As you'll know, it's obviously a police matter, and we're limited about what we can say as it works its way through the judicial system, as it should. But what I can say is that it won't distract us at all, and anyone in Interior Health, from protecting people from COVID-19.
Dr. Sue Pollock will take over as interim chief medical health officer on Monday. An apartment building in Pitt Meadows was evacuated after a fire broke out on the 10th floor. Fire crews say the cause of the fire is not yet known, but did confirm it started on the exterior of the unit. The single occupant in the damaged unit was able to get out safely. Some residents have been displaced due to water damage from the sprinkler system.
It does not only affect the communities that are directly involved in these events, it really impacts everyone.
Mental health experts share how Canadians can cope in the aftermath of national tragedies.
The brunt of the work is still on the marginalized folks that want to see the system changed.
A BC teacher says there are still too many barriers to teaching anti-racism in school. She says improvements to school curriculum could help prevent a violent and hateful attack like the one in London that killed 4 members of a family and left a young boy in hospital.
Annie Ohana says schools are more open to anti-racism lessons, but it's teachers who have to do all the work. They're digging for new material, creating teacher guides, and applying for grants to get Black and Indigenous educators to host workshops.
The hope is you build a wall high enough that then those negative forces don't deplete it so much that then like at 20, you have someone go out and do something like that. Because to be honest, I had an 8th grader say, well, he's just 20. Like my sister's 20, right? And it's true. People my age would have taught this person 5 years ago, right? In high school.
This Muslim leader says teaching about religions and traditions in schools could help students better understand diverse beliefs.
At the grassroots level, they need to introduce, as part of curriculum, some kind of education system in place where children are taught from the very start how to respect life and how to respect traditions and religions.
The Vancouver School Board saying it stands with the Muslim community in the wake of the London attack. It launched mandatory anti-racism training that will have most staff participate in September. The school district is also starting community engagement this week to listen to students, families, and staff and collect feedback for its anti-racism and non-discrimination strategic plan. Ohana says schools are making strides, but they need to go beyond concepts of multiculturalism, tolerance, and history written by white settlers.
I did bring in like literal hearing transcripts in the 1920s of chiefs and parents already complaining to the government about that these schools were not safe, that they wanted a different system. This is the 1920s, right? So a century ago. I highlight on that, right? South Asian involvement in World War I is not really celebrated, even though they really did, like over 1 million soldiers helped save Canada, essentially.
In Vancouver, Crystal Adaris, City News.
There are growing calls for the University of British Columbia to review its process for granting honorary degrees after it emerged that several people with troubling legacies have been honored in the past. UBC announced last week its Senate would be reviewing the honorary doctorate given to John Fergus O'Grady, the Catholic priest who was once principal of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Anthropology professor Charles Menzies says it's time to re-examine who should receive these honors.
In terms of the ones who are engaged in leading residential schools, Indian residential schools, it's very important for non-Indigenous people to recognize that this is the foundation upon which Canadian society has been built. And so it extends across the expression of racism against Indigenous people, but it also extends to Black people, Asian people, people of color. And these kind of systemic and structural institutional values laid the foundation of the country, and I think it's time for us to re-examine that foundation. And if we really want an open, equitable, fair society that everyone is welcome, where we don't have people running down people on the streets and shooting people, spitting on people, calling people names, towing hitches at them as you pass them on the street, we need to address this, and we have to remove these people from our list of honorees.
Menzies wants to see UBC conduct a full audit of all past honorary degree recipients.
I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
After 7 months of forced closures, movie theaters in British Columbia are planning to reopen as early as June 15th. The owner of this independent cinema in White Rock had already seen one of his theaters close during the pandemic, so to be able to reopen this one is a huge relief.
Our full neon sign, this is a nostalgic theater, this is the way we like it, we're a mom and pop theater. You're definitely going to be able to get your buttery popcorn.
Rahim Manji has been in the movie theater business since 2005. He was with his family when the announcement came late May that cinemas would be reopening as part of Phase 2 of BC's Restart Plan.
We sat actually as a family, me, my wife, and my son. I pulled him out of school early because we just had a feeling that it was going to happen. And we were jumping with joy. Our first initial closure was in March of 2020. We reopened in June and then closed back down in November. It was a big strain on our family, big strain not just on my immediate family, but our theater family. We had within all of our theaters, we had 50 employees and we had to lay everyone off. That affects other families as well, and it's very, very difficult to see.
With COVID-19 cases declining and vaccination rates on track, BC is set to enter the second stage of its Restart Plan, though the official announcement comes next week. Once theaters are open, they will have a 50-person limit. Here at the Caprice, they'll have assigned seating.
And as you can see here, we have every other row available to sit in.
Meanwhile, Landmark Cinemas is preparing to welcome people back to almost all of its facilities, and Cineplex is also getting their screens ready for safe viewing.
Everybody has just been raring to go and turn the lights back on and start popping popcorn. Like we're very excited to get back to it.
But after a year of streaming movies and TV shows from the comfort of home, what's going to draw people back to the big screen? Can the theaters really beat having your fridge right beside your couch? Besides improving COVID safety measures, Ken Mont with Cineplex and Manji don't have any unique comeback plans for their theaters. The main thing they're banking on is the idea that you just can't replace the cinema experience.
There's really nothing better than the big screen for a lot of these films.
Coming into a theater and you're watching a comedy and laughing with 50 or 100 other people, or watching a thriller and screaming at the same time, it's just a different feeling in a theater.
In White Rock, Kier Junos, City News.
It's that there's people out there that are willing to help, and they're willing to listen.
It's a campaign hoping to remind people you are not alone. Coming up, we'll take a look at the launch of Today is Better, a suicide prevention campaign you can now see at transit hubs across the country. The province is honoring the request of the Pachidat, Ditidat, and Hawaiiat First Nations and deferring the logging of old-growth forests in their territories. The deferrals protect more than 2,000 hectares of old-growth forests in the Fairy Creek watershed and the central Wallabrand area for 2 years, while the First Nations build resource stewardship plans for their lands. Premier Horgan says the government is committed to continued consultations with Indigenous peoples on further deferrals of old-growth forests.
We are doing things differently in British Columbia. This is not your grandparents' forest industry. It will be your grandchildren's forest industry if we manage it correctly. Working with Indigenous people, working with communities, working with those who are on the land right now, making a living for themselves and adding economic vitality to their area of the province. All of those things can be done if we work together. All of those things can be done if we respect the wishes of title holders, we work within the rules that all of us want to operate under, where we save these special areas for all time, and we work on the land to create wealth for all British Columbians.
Activists opposed to old-growth logging have been camped out at the Fairy Creek watershed since August. Well, the BC government is cracking down on illicit cannabis products. The province conducted testing on 20 dried cannabis samples from illegal retailers and found traces of pesticides, bacteria, fungi, and heavy metals. They also issued caution over illegal packaging that imitates popular candy and snack brands. They say it poses a danger as it is attractive to children. Minister Mike Farnworth is encouraging British Columbians to support legitimate small businesses who are trading legal and safe products.
Health Canada ensures that all legal products have to meet, key certain standards to ensure consumer and product safety. So if you've got something that's contaminated, for example, with heavy metals such as lead, zinc, or mercury, quite frankly, I wouldn't want to be ingesting that, and I don't think any member of the public would want to be ingesting that. And so that's why those standards are there, and that's why we're bringing this to the attention of the public to make it clear. It's like, look, you may be under the illusion that this is all produced in a organic, pesticide-free environment. The reality is what we're finding is it's not.
The province says it's continuing enforcement against illegal cannabis retailers and to date has shut down 160 illegal stores who were forced to shut down or voluntarily closed.
I was just in a really deep depression.
And I just felt like I had no future.
For me, it's loneliness, not loneliness, aloneness.
It's a campaign looking to help people who are trying to figure out where to turn. Operation Lifesaver is a national not-for-profit focused on rail safety, and it's behind the campaign Today is Better. National Director Sarah Mays says the goal is to connect those who may be considering suicide with the right resources.
There are 11 stories that are part of the campaign. We decided to focus on the personal stories of hope of people who've experienced thoughts of suicide but sought help.
The stories are produced in both English and French.
We weren't really doing anything to prevent suicides from happening. So these incidents are obviously really devastating for the individuals themselves, their friends and family, but also for railway employees, first responders, passengers, entire communities.
The number on the signs will connect the person to a trained responder. Right now, there are 37 of these signs at locations along TransLink's network.
They're all trained, compassionate responders, so you can expect someone who's going to listen.
That sentiment applies to any of the lines you reach out to, according to Stacey Ashton, who is the executive director of the Crisis Centre of BC.
24/7 crisis lines are your easiest access to help, whenever and whatever is happening, and you get to define your crisis. So don't feel like what you're going through is too minor or not a big deal.
Ashton says any kind of preventative measure, whether it's signs or high barriers, can make a difference in the life of someone experiencing a crisis.
The environmental design really helps with that, and then the signage just helps on the side of this is where you go for help. So you want to kind of do both, because you're both saying, don't do this. This is too hard, and it's not what you want to do. And instead, do this other thing. Here's the alternative: is reach out for help.
Now, among all these call takers, the message is simple. If you are somebody who is in need of help and you're struggling, there are different kinds of hotlines you can use. You can reach out to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now, in this case, you can reach out to 1-833-456-4566 if you find yourself in a position of crisis. In Vancouver, Rhea Renew, City News. As that settlement has been reached in the Indian Residential Schools Day Scholar Class Action lawsuit. Now, this decision involves day students who return to their homes at night. These students were able to seek compensation under the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement for physical and sexual abuse, but were not able to seek compensation for the experience of attending Indian residential schools. The signing of the agreement recognizes the harm suffered by these day students. The settlement combines individual compensation and investments to support healing, education, language, culture, and commemoration for survivors and descendants.
It does not only affect the communities that are directly involved in these events, it really impacts everyone.
It's been a heartbreaking few weeks as Canadians cope with successive national tragedies. Indigenous peoples and Muslims in Canada still reeling after the tragic discovery at Kamloops and Sunday's London truck attack. But the effects on mental health can even be felt by those outside those communities.
It impacts us greatly. It further activates our stress axis, causing even more production and release of the stress hormone cortisol, which then will cause peripheral inflammation, but also neuroinflammation. And this will interfere with the neurochemical systems in our brain, predisposing us even more to certain mental illnesses that are stress-related.
Canadians are already dealing with stress and anxiety from the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing public health restrictions. Coping with recent tragedies is only adding to our collective burden. After Sunday's attack, people assembled for vigils and memorials across Canada, and while those events might present public health risks, there's also great value in mourning together.
Part of grieving and being in a group is to feel supported, is to feel that we're not alone in this situation, and that touch that we get from a hug, from someone putting their hand on our shoulder or around our shoulder. These are all contacts, physical contacts, that are really important in regulating our emotions.
When we're going through particularly difficult mental health challenges, we may think that we're the only one, and there's no support out there, and no one would understand us. We have very good services, but we need to be able to access those.
Nazila Kenlu says people shouldn't be ashamed of needing to reach out to loved ones or mental health services for help. All the traditional tenets of good mental health still apply now: exercise, good sleeping habits, and not abusing substances. But after national tragedies like Kamloops and London, some may find strength in advocacy.
We know when we're more engaged with decision making, when we are more involved, we have a sense of agency, and having a sense of agency always makes us feel better. Having a sense of powerlessness, having a sense of invisibility is not good for our mental health. So absolutely, advocacy, organizing, demanding change is important.
In Ottawa, Shaoli Lee, City News.
It's interesting, when I played hockey, we had this saying in the dressing room with a lot of the guys, you suffer in silence. Like, don't talk about your injuries, just play.
Feelings and emotions, it's difficult for a lot of people to talk about their mental health, but retired NHLer Trevor Linden is hoping to change that narrative. He's teamed up with the Canadian Men's Health Foundation, hoping to change the stigma surrounding mental health and to start a conversation.
Unfortunately, I think that's kind of men in general. Suffer in silence. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about how you're feeling. Don't talk about, guys don't get together with their friends and talk about their feelings. That's just a fact. But they should, and they can, and it's okay.
Linden is no stranger to suffering in silence after playing in the 1994 Stanley Cup Finals with a cracked rib. A new study showed that 68% of adults in Canada said their mental health has gotten worse since the beginning of the pandemic, with more than 72% of Canadian men having unhealthy habits that put them at risk for chronic conditions and diseases. Linden hosted a virtual event about the power of talking about mental health, but also the small changes families can make to improve their overall mental and physical well-being.
And I think we're continuing to break down those barriers and talk about, what's happening with us, especially now, because it's been such a difficult situation. And mentally, it's been so hard. And I think it's brought a lot of that to the forefront, which has been good. And now it's just about, okay, how do we deal with it? How do we handle it? And it's good for men to talk about how they're feeling.
What are you doing to manage your stress and kind of navigate it during the pandemic? Because we all know you as an elite athlete, you've been in high pressure situations, but this is obviously different than anything we've ever experienced.
I think we've all had our challenges with a situation that no one ever couldn't imagine the last 14, 15 months, regardless of what line of work you're in, the family stresses, the work pressure, just the change in lifestyle, the isolation we've all felt has been something that has been real. So, I think for myself, I always look at moving, whether it be going for a walk, going for a hike, a run, a bike ride, a workout, is not only is it good for me physically, but more importantly, I've always believed that it's the best mental health I can get, and it puts me in a better place.
If you go to menshealthfoundation.ca, there are a number of resources for anyone on tips to how to improve your mental health, to resources of people to talk to. For City News, I'm Lindsay Dunn.
Well, Vancouver's news is always available on the radio with News 1130 or online anytime at citynews1130.com. Your next edition of City News is tonight at 11. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your night.